You're listening to the Amplifying Leadership podcast, where we explore what great leadership really looks like through our real stories, actionable takeaway, and expert conversations. I am Tara Lehman, founder and CEO of Amplifying Leadership, here to help you lead with intention and influence. Thanks for tuning in to today's guest episode. Today, I am welcoming Chris Clearfield, author of The High Altitude Entrepreneur, also a leadership strategist and owner of Clearfield Leadership. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much, Tara. I'm really excited to be here.
I am too, because it's a great topic and something I think needs to be talked a lot more about, and that is
Mm.
addressing the overwhelm as a leader. Can you start by telling our audience why that is an important topic for you?
Well, so many leaders that I work with are overwhelmed. I mean, in the entrepreneurial domain, I was talking with an entrepreneur the other day who she said that for her movie night with her kids meant she's on her laptop checking email while her kids are watching a movie. And not only does overwhelm take us out of connection with our family and it sort of focuses our business in a way that isn't healthy, it also makes us underperform in our business because when we are overwhelmed, our brains are in the midst of a stress response. And so we are going to problem solving very, very quickly without access to the creative tools and the creative thinking that we really need to work with the most challenging leadership problems we all work with today.
Mhm. It's interesting. I was talking to a client of mine today, and we were talking about overwhelm and burnout and things like that that are coming up for him. And one of the things that we were talking about is that if we don't take care of us first, it's really hard to take care of family or work. We have to take care of us first. So when we're feeling overwhelmed, that's something that we really need to pay attention to. What are your thoughts on that?
I am in agreement with that. And I think that, to me, that phrase, we got to put our own oxygen masks on before we can help
Yes.
others,
Yeah.
that really applies here. And for so many leaders I work with, there's this whole idea of the servant leader, and they are servants to their business, to their teams. And there is something so wonderful in that. And if all you're doing is extending yourself for others around you and not taking care of yourself, then you're really not going to be able to show up and serve others or model what sustainable service looks like for your
Mhm.
business and your team.
So I want to ask you because you say there is a hidden reason about burnout. What is that? What is it that, and why do we miss it actually? Before we continue the conversation we're currently having, go ahead.
Yeah, so the hidden reason behind overwhelm and burnout is really ourselves. And we were just touching on it, right? It is
Hmm.
our commitment to operate in the way that we are operating now. And until we really are able to see the pattern that we're operating in, we're not able to change it. And the reason we miss it is just that it is so hard for leaders to identify their own blind spots. And that's really why I wrote The High Altitude Entrepreneur. It is really a step by step guide to shifting your perspective and seeing your own patterns so that you can change it.
Mm.
And it's that pattern that's at the heart of overwhelm.
And it's about bringing that unconscious stuff conscious with self-reflection and things like that, right?
That's right.
Yeah, excellent. So how do we then, going back to what we were talking about, but bringing this in it as well, how do we as leaders, if we're feeling this way, we're feeling overwhelmed, maybe we're starting to realize it through self-reflection, like what are those strategies that really help us look after ourselves so we can look after others if we're feeling
Yeah.
that overwhelm?
Well, there are hundreds of strategies out there, right? I mean, there
Yeah.
is like all the calendar hacks, all the block time off in your calendar, delegate more, all of these things. And
Hmm.
some of those can be effective for some people some of the time. But where I start to get really interested is when I'm working with a leader who is trying all of those things. They're putting focus blocks on their calendar, but they're just blowing through them. They're not
Mm-hmm.
committing to them. Or, they're trying to delegate, but then they find themselves getting back involved in the project or the decision or whatever it is
Mm-hmm.
that they've
Yeah.
they've sort of seemingly delegated. So the thing I get curious about is, well, what's happening instead? Like, what are you doing instead of holding on to those focus blocks or really stepping out of the work? Because to me, that's where the real gold is, and that's where bringing the kind of curiosity to oneself can really reveal that, oh, there is some commitment I have to operating in this way. And it's really not until we excavate down and we figure out what that commitment is, are we actually able to change and shift. So there's, thousands of tools and tips out there,
Mm-hmm.
but the real thing to do is to understand like our that unconscious operating model that we have, and reveal it so we can shift it.
So how do we do that?
Well, in the high altitude entrepreneur, one of the things we do is I write about tensions. I write
Mm-hmm.
about, hey, when you are feeling stuck, it's often because you are treating something as a problem to solve that is really a tension to manage. So I'll give you an example. I was working with
Mm-hmm.
a
Please.
founder, co-founder of a kind of industrial repair company, and her whole business was oriented around delivering things urgently. When a piece of equipment went down on a client site, they would try to get in and repair it as much as possible. And when she and I started working together, her basic comment was, I've got all these projects on my whiteboard. I've got all these strategic things that I'm supposed to be advancing, but I'm not advancing any of them. And I don't know what to do about it. And so what we did is, instead of treating that like, oh, here's a problem you have to solve, we really looked at the tension between urgency and strategic focus that she was living
Mm-hmm.
inside. And she started to identify what was the payoff of operating in urgency all the time. What was the payoff for her individually? What was the payoff for her business? And what was she worried about if she paid more attention to her strategic focus? And it was like, oh, the payoff is pretty obvious. It's like she got a dopamine hit from solving problems. She got
Mm-hmm.
some ego affirmation from being at the center of things. And when she turned to kind of her question about why she was shying away from strategic focus, it was like, oh, this isn't as exciting and it's not as immediate, and I can't see the immediate benefit. So once we started to identify like why she was motivated to operate in the way she was, she could kind of see that whole picture. And then she had an opportunity to really shift her behavior.
It's absolutely amazing when we recognize something that we've been doing unconsciously and we make it conscious, just how sometimes there's a light bulb moment that goes on,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the moment I really live for with my clients.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we start out with. I start out with people doing a kind of two 90-minute sessions. And from that comes a diagnostic that's really like, hey, here are some of the patterns you're living in. Let's map them out and let's figure out what are the next steps. What are some small next actions you can take to experiment with these patterns that for most of us have been around for as long as we've been leaders, and for most of
Mm-hmm.
us, our whole lifetimes. These are products of our whole lifetimes of conditioning that have led us
Yeah.
to operate in this way in this moment.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. If we don't do the work to bring the unconscious conscious and we're just always in overwhelm and stress mode, what are the consequences to our teams? How does this affect our
Mm.
employees and our organizations?
Well, it goes back to that, we have got to put our own oxygen masks on first. So if we're
Mm-hmm.
operating unconsciously and unaware, and we're creating overwhelm from that, that overwhelm is cascading down to our whole team, right? It's cascading down.
Mm-hmm.
If we're an entrepreneur, if we're a founder, it's cascading across our whole business. Maybe even cascading to the kind of customers that we're selecting in to work with us and the kind of partners that we're bringing in. So if we're not looking at our own patterns, we can be sure that we are mirroring those patterns in everything
Mm-hmm.
we're touching and everything else we're designing. Practically speaking, what that means is, that means teams that aren't stepping up and taking ownership because they genuinely don't know how. It means
Mm-hmm.
problems, the same problem that's getting created over and over again because the solution is kind of a point fix rather than looking at the system or changing the design. And
Hmm.
so we have teams that aren't able to work with their full creativity. So it means we have talent that's underutilized and, probably in many cases is going to walk. And so we'll have retention issues. And it really keeps our business or our division, our team from kind of growing beyond where they are and being able to tackle whatever comes next, whether that's because we're shifting the business or because things like AI are shifting how we work.
For sure. And, it's that lead by example. We all say we need to lead by example, but there can be negative consequences if you're leading by the wrong example, right? I
Right.
mean, and so it really is about bringing that forward and figuring out. And so sometimes it could be, why is my team reacting this way? And sometimes that's the self-reflection is, what do I need to look at myself at rather than always
Right.
blaming the team, right? Do you find that too, that the blame the team comes up?
Yes, absolutely. And I live and work in a paradigm where blame does not exist, right? Like when something goes wrong, for me, it's an opening for curiosity.
Hmm.
It's an
Yeah.
opening for investigation. And more often than not, the investigation it starts with me. It starts with myself because as leaders, we have to recognize that we are responsible for creating the conditions that those around
Hmm.
us are working in. And so to go even to something as simple as delegation, right? Like this idea to just delegate. Well, so many people take that idea and they think about that on the level of tasks. Like, hey, I need you to go do this and bring it back to me.
Yeah.
And that is
Yeah.
not the right level to operate at. So if you give someone a task and they come back with something that is unexpected, it's not their fault. It's a communications problem,
Hmm.
not a delegation problem. And the way to shift out of that is to move a level up in the system. And instead of giving them a task, give them the goal and the context of what you're
Oh, I love
doing and
that.
give
Yeah.
them the freedom and the constraints so that they know where they can move and where they can't. And then they tell
Hmm.
you how they're going to accomplish it, what's their intent. And now you've closed the loop today when you're talking with them about it, rather than 3 months from now when they come back with something that seems totally wrong. Like that's why leaders micromanage because they haven't given clear context. So that's just an example of an opportunity where we
Hmm.
have to really look to ourselves.
Yeah. And to add to that, I always say to people, it's not the people that have done something wrong. It's usually something wrong with a process, whether that be a
Yeah.
communication process, whether that be your policies written incorrectly. There's usually something with a process that's not right. And we're so quick as humans to blame somebody else, right?
Yes.
That sometimes we forget that maybe it wasn't Tara's fault. Maybe it was that I didn't train Tara properly. And
Right.
really digging down to that root cause of what's going on rather than just suddenly blaming somebody, right?
Yeah, I love the way you put that. And one of the things that I really hold is that there comes a point in one's leadership journey where your job really shifts from being a doer to being a designer. And you
Hmm.
have to be able to recognize when that shift happens. And when you're a designer, what you're doing is you are laying out the problem and then working with your team to come up with how are we going to solve this problem. And
Hmm.
just like you said, like the levers that I talk about in the book for like how do you design a system that helps you solve a challenge, it's people, process, technology, and knowledge. And so it's
Hmm.
actually pretty once you can kind of parameterize it along those four dimensions, it becomes pretty straightforward to bring a team together and say, okay, here is the tension that we're working with, right? Like a
Hmm.
tension around like how are we serving our clients versus what boundaries are we holding in terms of what
Hmm.
we take on. That could be an internal team or an external team. I was working with a property manager who his firm was just like doing everything for their clients, doing
Hmm.
whatever it was they needed. And what it meant was the work wasn't very standardized and they had no idea how much time, effort, energy a particular client was going to take up. And
Hmm.
so to kind of recognize this was the first step. And then to design around it was to say, okay, well, what are the people, processes, technology, and knowledge that we need to actually create a system that kind of serves our clients and holds our boundaries? And what are the non-negotiables in that so we can really design a way forward? That's the leader as the designer, not as the doer.
Hmm. And you said a word I love is standardization, because when we have large teams, those standard processes or working with the team to create a process are what help us avoid some of those issues and the people pointing and all those other things that might come up. So love that you brought that up. I have a question about communication for you though. I'm curious because we know that overwhelm, stress, and burnout, people don't like talking about mental health in the workplace at all. I mean, that's just something
Mm,
that some places find as taboo. So, how do we make these conversations okay? Not only for
mm.
myself as a leader saying, you know what, everybody, I'm really stressed, just FYI, but how do we make it okay that our employees can come to us as well? So, I know there's a couple of different questions in there, but what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think you named part of the principal thrust of this. And I was working with a senior corporate leader. He has a huge role. He runs a, billion-plus-dollar budget manufacturing
Hmm.
facility. I mean, just massive role, so much complexity in it. And he was talking with me and he was basically saying, like, hey, I've hit a wall. Like I'm feeling emotional burnout. And I said, great. Like, have you talked with your team about that? And he said, actually, yes. He said, I was in a team
Excellent.
meeting and I said, hey, I just want you all to know that this is what's going on for me. Like, this is what I'm feeling right now. And they said, how did that land? He was like, it was awkward.
I
and
bet it
and
was, right? Yeah.
right. And he said it was awkward. He was like, there was silence. He said, I think about half the people in the room had no idea what I was talking about. He said, but two or three people came up to me afterwards and said, hey, that was really meaningful that you said that. I'm feeling that way too, and I'm not sure what to do with it. So, that is again the leader as the courageous modeler. And I get actually chills
Hmm.
kind of telling this story again. Because leadership is courageous, right? To really be a leader, that is an act of courage. And that's what
Hmm.
that's what my client did. He stepped into an empty space where he was uncertain of how he would be received because he thought it was the right thing to do. And it did. It brought up some really tricky things and it brought up some good things for his team. So
Hmm.
that's one way I think to do it. We can really, stand by the courage of our convictions that this is that
Hmm.
this is something that's important and that we want to step forward and do. But I also don't want to feel like I'm pushing everybody off a cliff with no parachute,
Hmm.
right? And
Yes.
one of the ways I work with people, and one of the things we do in the high altitude framework is we design around experiments. So, hey, if the, really the tension we're sitting in here is like how transparent versus how opaque are you being about your inner state with your team? And what you
Hmm.
named at the beginning is for many of leaders, our default state is opacity, right? We're kind of keeping
Hmm.
it buttoned up. We feel like we're supposed to know
Yeah.
the answer. We're not leading with that vulnerability. And there's a lot of upside to that, right? Particularly in some cultures that are, you know, but politicized in different ways. And there's a lot of upside to leading with that transparency and vulnerability. And so
Hmm.
one of the ways that we can experiment with that as a leader without having to throw ourselves off the cliff with no parachute is we can do that in one-on-ones with our people, right?
Hmm.
So I see so many leaders use one-on-ones as kind of like status updates, project check-ins,
Task
and
list.
I
Yeah.
task lists, and
Yeah.
I just think that that is the wrong way to use your one-on-ones with your
Agreed.
people. You should not be having those kinds of one-on-ones. They're actually not advancing things. They're kind of busy work. What you should be doing instead is maybe once a month or once a quarter, you should be scheduling a really deep check-in with somebody
Hmm.
on your team, an hour to 90 minutes, depending on who they are, how well you work with them, your skip levels too. And and it's like, hey, how are we working together? What do you like about this? What are you struggling with? Here's what I'm struggling with. Like, what are you interested in next in your career? Here's what I'm interested in next. Oh, how can I support you in that?
Hmm.
So there's this really like relational level of leadership that I think is so important that can really get lost if all our connections with people are mediated through this kind of tactical and strategic. And that's another opportunity to really connect about, hey, what's really going on? Here's how I'm feeling. How are you feeling?
Yeah. And one thing I do suggest to people if they're just starting with one-on-ones is create yourself a small agenda so that you don't go off topic and start reviewing the task list because that's
Yeah.
not the purpose of those things. So create yourself an agenda that you can just kind of follow and stay on target of let's have a real conversation rather than did you get this done? Did you get that done? That's
Yeah.
that doesn't need to be done in an intentional one-on-one, right? Where you're building relationships. So I love that.
Yeah. I mean, what are you
So
seeing about
go ahead.
people being vulnerable, people kind of leaders opening up and how they're doing that and how when they're not doing it and what that looks like?
Yeah, so it depends on who they are and what background they come in. So I came through trucking and transportation. So I learned, it's kind of like you don't really get vulnerable because that's not who we are, but we're friends because it's a very small industry here in Canada. Small in quotes, right? Still a large industry, but you get to know the people very well, especially when you attend events. So, you get to know the people and all of these things, but then it's like, what do you share? So you tend to talk business. But when you start to have employees or, suppliers or vendors or customers, and you're starting to have a little bit more, you're starting to build more trust. So I always would start small, hey, do you have any kids?
Yeah.
Or, what's your favorite animal? And then you get to see them next time. And I found out last time you love fishing. So I'd be like, hey, did you get up to the lake and catch a perch this time? You're building a connection. And then that connection can then build the business connection and the relationships that you want at work. I think that's a great strategy, unless you have a different opinion on that.
No, I'm in agreement with that. And I coach, my practice really spans corporate leaders and then entrepreneurs. And obviously the high altitude entrepreneur, there's a focus
Mhm.
on entrepreneurs in that. And one of the things I love about coaching leaders and in particular entrepreneurs is that entrepreneurs see so clearly how their own tendencies have shaped their business, right? And
Oh, for
so
sure. Yeah.
they're really willing to kind of name that and stay in that space, and they also see the way that as they shift their businesses, it has an immediate and direct payoff to the lives that they're leading and the way they're able to
Hmm.
be with their families. And, I had a call with a CEO of a kind of Canadian, sort of small size manufacturer, like 10, 15 million in revenue
Hmm.
the other day. And, we started out by talking about his family, and he had one kid and he wanted to have a couple more on
Hmm.
the way. And he was like, how do I want to work in this business so it's serving my family instead of me serving the business?
And it's, those little things like, do you have kids or those types of small questions, they really can help us build the trust factor, especially if we've never really, if this is a new person to us, a new employee to us, a new leader to us, that
Yeah.
trust factor starts to build a little bit because we need to know who you are and we need to trust you, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So, in order to summarize our conversation today, is there any tip that you haven't shared today or a strategy about beating overwhelm or at least helping get to there that you would like to share today?
Well, I think the thing I'll circle back to is sort of where I started, right? Which is there really is a way to look at yourself in the pattern. And that's really what the high altitude entrepreneur is all about, right? It's about, hey, identifying the pattern of stuckness that you're in that's contributing to your overwhelm, and then really mapping it out in a couple of easy steps. And
Hmm.
right now with the book, I'm making the first three chapters available where it really gives an overview of this framework. So you can go to highaltitudebook.com and download it. And then along with the book, we have a free workbook that's linked to from the book. So
Excellent.
in 5 minutes, you really can be taking one of these tensions that's unconsciously driving you and making it visible so that you can start to work with it.
Excellent. So, you did mention your website is if someone wanted to connect with you, do you have like a LinkedIn or somewhere else that they can connect with you through?
Yeah, so highaltitudebook.com is the best place to go to connect
Okay,
with the
perfect.
book and kind of what we've been talking about. And then on LinkedIn, I'm Chris Clearfield, and folks can find me there, and I'm always open to a conversation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This is a great conversation to have and needs to be spoke about more often. I think it needs to be normalized for sure. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks, Tara. It's great to be with you.
A big thank you, of course, to you, our listeners. We hope you gained some valuable insights or practical takeaways from today's conversation with Chris. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a rating or a review. It is one of the best ways to support the podcast and help us and Chris reach even more leaders with meaningful stories, advice, tips, and more. If you are looking to clarify leadership priorities, build strong teams, or empower those around you, I'm here to help. Explore our solutions, offers, resources, and the Amplifying Leadership Circle community at amplifyingleadership.ca, because leadership is better when we do it together. Until next time, remember, leadership matters.